Welcome to The Futurist, Public Intellectual. Today's podcast is special because it will be addressing two completely different topics with a common core: plastic surgery and prostitution. In the U.S., the former is completely legal, while the latter is mostly illegal. While at first glance they might seem to be nothing alike, they cater to the same customer demographic: ugly people. But Brad, that's so subjective. Well, beauty is certainly subjective, and even the ugliest Quasimodo might have someone who is interested in them. But the brutal reality is that everyone has to face, every day, subject to the beauty standards of mainstream society. Let me be clear. I acknowledge that people of above-average attractiveness can and do engage in plastic surgery and prostitution, but since this episode is a defense of both, I will be focusing on ugly people. How am I defining ugly? If the vast majority of a given population finds a person unattractive, then that person can be categorized as ugly. For example, let's say the senior class of a high school is 200 students. If 150 of them find Marie to be unattractive, then Marie is ugly. This definition intuitively makes sense because beautiful is simply the inverse situation. Mainstream beauty standards are powerful because when one is on the beautiful side of the spectrum, one becomes privileged, while the ugly ones often experience derision and isolation. Beautiful people get more dates, more sex, and even better jobs, while ugly people experience the opposite. There are plenty of valid reasons why someone would want to be beautiful. Since life is so much harder when one is ugly, people shouldn't be criticized for turning to plastic surgery. Even though plastic surgery can improve the lives of ugly people, sometimes, especially for men, the sex drive cannot be satisfied by the number of successful matches one gets on Tinder. Aside from people with extreme libidos, people who simply never get any sex are a liability to society. What society so often forgets to acknowledge is that ugly people want to have sex too. It is unreasonable to expect them to accept celibacy simply because they are too ugly to fuck. Since the sex drive is a powerful, primal instinct, it is understandable that it will make people do crazy things when frustrated. One only needs to look at the case of Elliot Rodger of the 2014 Isla Vista, California murders to see how dangerous it is for society to continue to ignore the sexual needs of ugly people. For whatever reason, it seems a lot of people considered Elliot to be unattractive. Up to the age of 22, he remained a virgin, despite desperately wanting to have sex throughout his life. Unable to cope with his lack of sex and affection from his female peers, Elliot wrote a 137-page manifesto outlining his hatred of women and justified what he called the Day of Retribution. 6 people died and 14 were injured on his Day of Retribution. What I am proposing today is that prostitution should be seen as a salve to the frustrated sexual needs of ugly people. Prostitution in the U.S. is only legal in 10 counties in Nevada. Everywhere else, it's illegal. One could argue that the decriminalization of sex work would have a more positive effect on society than marijuana, and yet the legalization of marijuana throughout the states is well underway. other than its medical uses, marijuana doesn't actually improve society. Having widespread marijuana doesn't mean that the United States is a better place. That's why I'm neutral about the legalization of marijuana for recreational purposes. However, in comparison, legal prostitution would have allowed someone like Elliot Rodger to experience what sex was like, and at the very least, alleviated his sexual frustration, paving the way to more therapy. Ugly people experience a tremendous amount of pain. If we acknowledge their humanity, then we should understand why they might choose plastic surgery to improve their lives or use prostitution as a means to get through the day. Both plastic surgery and prostitution should be destigmatized, and prostitution should be legalized in some manner. Humanity's attraction to beauty cannot be halted, but we can at least try to mitigate the pain of its victims. Thank you for listening to The Futurist Public Intellectual.